Welcome to High Notes, conversations on the art and business of voice. High Notes. Make sure you never miss a video on our channel by pressing that subscribe button, and if you like this episode, please do give it a like and leave us a comment below. Now, let's meet this month's guest. This week, I'm joined by broadcaster, author and coach Janey Lee Grace to explore what it really means to find and use your authentic voice on air, in business and in life. Janie shares stories from her years on BBC Radio 2 with the legendary Steve Wright, insights from her new book, From Wham to Woo, and the lessons she's learned about connection, presence and heart-centered communication. She also reflects on her personal journey through sobriety, the challenges of writing her memoir, and her commitment to helping others step into their true selves. It's a warm, insightful conversation filled with humour, wisdom, and practical tools for anyone ready to speak and live with courage and clarity. Janie, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
So let's go right back to the beginning. I want to know, was there anything particular about your childhood or teenage years that you think led you to the career that you have today?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one because it certainly wasn't anything that came from my background, if you like. My parents weren't in anything creative or showbiz, but I definitely knew from a very early age that let's put it this way, I wanted to show off. I kind of knew that. So I have no idea where it came from, but I did know that really early on. So I met another little girl on the street who told me about a Sunday school that she went to, where if you went along to the Sunday school and you sang, they gave you sweets. And I thought, well, that sounds amazing. So clearly the result of my dental issues later in life. But that's literally how I started off. So I would kind of go along to church because that meant I could sing. And I don't know. I don't know where it came from. I find it very interesting, the whole nature versus nurture thing, because it certainly wasn't within my background, but it was definitely within me from an early age. So I was always determined that I would do something within, I suppose at first I thought it was the kind of creative world. I was very good at art. So I thought I'd end up going into portraiture or fine art, but then sort of stepped sideways and went into performance art. But I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so a natural born performer then, you'd say?
Possibly a natural born show off. It's probably the same thing.
It's the same thing, I'm sure. So you spent over 2 decades on one of the UK's most popular radio shows with the late Steve Wright on BBC Radio 2. I used to listen to that many, many years ago. I've had fillet of fish going around in my head all morning. What did those years on air teach you about voice, presence and connection?
Well, I was already in radio before I worked with Steve. I was a DJ on Virgin Radio for 6 years. And then I moved to Radio 2. But I think working with Steve for all those years brought new insights that I hadn't had before as a presenter, because Steve was so incredibly professional, absolutely loved what he did. He lived and breathed radio. But his main thing was this sense of being relatable. You know, Steve would work unbelievably hard to make sure that what you heard on the radio sounded as if it was completely sort of off the cuff and as if you were having a chat to someone in the pub or whatever. So there was that sense of someone talking directly to you. We always say in radio, you're only talking to one person. And I think that's how many listeners felt, as though we really were talking directly to you personally. But in order to do that, you have to be really sure that you've got the zeitgeist right. You know, you've got what's relatable. And I think that's what Steve did so brilliantly. So many topics would go out of the window. You know, Tim or I might suggest, let's do a talkie about X and Y. And Steve would go, no one's interested. Okay.
He was the arbiter, was he? He was
absolutely. And he was always right. You know, he always was right. So what it meant was that, you know, whether you were sort of a mum on the school run or on a building site or my old mum in her care home or whatever your circumstances, it sounded like fun. It sounded relatable. It meant something to you or it didn't. But either way round, it was kind of relaxed, even though actually hours of preparation had gone into it. Hours and hours.
That's such a skill, isn't it? You and our engineer and I were just talking about how we used to listen to that show and there was such a sense of fun. Just as and it was kind of water cooler conversation, right?
Yeah,
Because
exactly that.
everybody listened and that does take so much skill. What did you learn from that experience with him, do you think?
I think I just learned that being able to connect with people where they're at is the really important thing. And it's the angle, it's what is the nub of the topic I think I was able to get to very quickly from working with Steve. But the other thing was just that, as you mentioned, that sense of fun. When the show ended, it actually took me a good sort of couple of months before. Obviously, there was the fact that I was no longer going into work. There was that, of course. But in addition, I felt really odd. And it took me ages before I realised I literally wasn't laughing as much. I was physically not using those muscles. And I suddenly realised one day, oh my goodness, when I think how much we used to laugh. And it did make me realise the importance of remembering to have fun. You have to make your own fun, don't you?
Yeah, but what an incredible memory from leaving a job and thinking, I'm not laughing as much.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people would be able to say that.
That's
it's
true.
Quite special, right?
Yeah, it is true.
What did you think you learned about your voice, particularly after doing a show that big? I've presented breakfast shows much, much smaller than that. And, there's something about being in the moment and being able to respond as well. I know it's really planned, but a lot of the magic happens to the response of callers or whatever. What did you learn about your voice and being in the moment and presence?
Well, I mean, over the years, as I'm sure you can imagine, there would be days that were, for me personally, good and bad. All kinds of stuff happened in those 24 years. And I can probably count on one hand, but possibly two. But there were certainly some days where I was really having an unbelievably difficult time. Sometimes literally before the show started, literally before I'd have an unbelievably difficult phone call or whatever it might be. But the reality is, this is a professional gig and the show must go on. And I learned to be able to do that, to be able to leave stuff behind at the door. If I was going to work, obviously if I wasn't, that's different. But if I was committed to going on air, that's nobody else needs to know about that. And I just got good at leaving it behind and literally stepping into a new persona. And I don't like the phrase fake it till you make it, if you like, but create it till you make it. So I had to create, I had to be present. I suppose it's a form of mindfulness, really. I had to leave behind everything that was going on because there was nothing I could do about it in that moment, obviously. And then step into this persona of, if you like, my radio persona and do the gig. And more often than not, just doing that actually was able to be uplifting in some way. Usually the stress I went back to felt a bit less after having done that. So I think it was quite an interesting exercise in remembering to come back to be in the moment, really.
I think there's so much about resilience. Lots I want to pick up on there. First of all, being a woman on air. That's where I came from. And I coach a lot of female broadcasters now. And I would say 95% of us have experienced some time, of course, in our career where we might have struggled with that position for whatever reasons, might be personal reasons or, reasons of work. And I want to know, was there ever a moment in your broadcasting career when you felt like you had lost your voice and then a moment when you felt you found it again?
It was slightly different for me, I think, because certainly I started off at Radio 2 with my own show, which was an early Saturday morning show. And then I started working with Steve. And the reality was, I think I got thrown clear of a lot of the politics because I was effectively a co-host with Steve. There were lots of things that I wasn't invited to. There were trips that the guys did that I wasn't invited to, which probably hurt at the time. But I think their line of thinking would probably just have been, she's got 4 kids, enough already. So we can only take a small team to Nashville or wherever they were going. So we just won't invite her. So there were a few things like that. But yeah, aside from that, I think I did get thrown clear of a lot of the politics. I think my perception is it's more difficult for women who are doing their own very mainstream show. So if you're on Drive Time or you're on Breakfast or you're on News, I think it can be harder.
Yeah. Can you imagine? I mean, when I was broadcasting, we didn't have social media.
Can you imagine? I can't even imagine what that must be like for those people in those big slots with the social as well. And, do you feel lucky to have not been doing it at that time when we had social platforms?
Yes and no. I think, I think back to some of the things that I experienced over those 24 years, and to have had a reason to document them would have been great. So when I wrote my memoir at the end of last year, I had to gather masses of photos and talk about lots of experiences, of course. And I was actually so disappointed that I had almost no photographs of any of the people that I'd met over the years up until, really the last sort of 5 years of the show, because we simply didn't walk around with smartphones taking pictures. But now I'm thinking to myself, what I would have given to have, have that to have just been a normal thing to do, because then I would have had all those amazing pictures and all those memories of the celebs we met in the sort of first 15, 20 years of the show.
But maybe the stories are more evocative because you don't have those photos. So you really have to create those stories.
That is true.
Tell me a little bit about your memoir. Tell me about that and what the process of writing that was like. Was it cathartic? How did it feel to finish it?
Yeah, I really resisted the offer to write a memoir for a long time, because a publisher asked me, after I'd written Happy, Healthy, Sober in 2020, a publisher asked me if I wanted to write. Actually, maybe it was before that. I beg your pardon. It was before that, actually. I was asked if I wanted to write a memoir. And it was only 2-3 years after George Michael had died. And of course, I was going to be talking about all of my years working with Wham. And at that point, I was still getting quite a few calls from producers or journalists who wanted my input on something they were doing about Wham or about George. And it used to drive me insane, actually, that I would have to spend so much time explaining to these producers and journalists that I wouldn't be dishing any dirt. So don't bother to even come round and film me if that's what you're after. We know the game. Let's just be really upfront. And on several occasions, they would say, "Oh, no, absolutely. We just want a really fun piece on Wham." And so I remember at least 2 occasions where whole film crews came to film me, and everything's set up and they're doing the whole thing and we're having this little chat. And then, of course, they throw in a few sneaky questions that they think will catch me out. They don't catch me out. I'm way too experienced for that. And so I end up on the cutting room floor. It's a waste of time for everyone. And so at that point, when I was asked if I wanted to write a memoir, I remember thinking, there's no point, because I'm not going to be sharing anything nasty. So no one will buy it if that's all people want. But then I think it was 2023, I don't know, obviously the Radio 2 show had ended, and I chatted to a publisher again. And at that point, I just thought, well, you know what, I'll just share my stuff. And if people are interested in a positive approach, they'll get that. So yeah, the book's called From Wham to Woo, A Life on the Mic. And it's a really fun blast through my music biz days with Wham and various other bands that I worked with, and my 5 minutes of fame with Cola Boy. And then obviously all the radio years. So yeah, there's lots in there. The process of writing it, that was an interesting one, because obviously you're digging back into all of your memories and all the fun stories. The tricky piece was trying to decide let's face it, in a long career like mine and a long life like mine, there's going to be some people you don't get on with, right? There's going to be some tricky stuff. So the question is, how much do you say about that at the risk of upsetting someone else? You've got to be truthful. You've got to be authentic. It would be a ridiculous book if someone with my career and at my age just wrote, "Oh, everyone was wonderful." So I had to walk a slightly fine line of being really honest and truthful without kind of getting sued, basically. But I think I've done that, because most of it is positive, and there isn't really anything that anyone would be able to sue me for, because there's nothing that isn't 100% true.
Well, we shall definitely include it in the show notes. A fascinating read, so you'll know where to get your hands on it and find no salacious gossip whatsoever in between those pages.
But lots of fun stuff. There's actually lots of laugh out loud funny stuff along the way, particularly from some of the radio. If you worked in radio, you'll enjoy it.
Oh, I can't wait. So fast forward to today. I want to know how you help others find their voice, especially those who feel nervous about visibility, or even those who don't see themselves as performers.
Yeah. So I think that just to take you back to how that kind of work started for me, when I'd been doing the show for, I don't know, 10 years, whatever, 12 years, I brought my first book out. It was all about my passion for holistic living. In fact, goodness, it was even longer ago than that. It was 19 years ago, actually, now. Now I think of it. So Imperfectly Natural Woman was that book. And it was like my life's work. I really did sort of give everything in that book, all my passion for holistic living. And initially, because I wasn't hugely famous and I wasn't with a massive publisher, it did absolutely nothing. And of course, I couldn't talk about it on the radio, on the shows. That's not what you do within the BBC, as I'm sure you know. But I was desperate to get some publicity for this book because it was my life's work and I really wanted to get it out there. So I had to very quickly get good at knowing how to sum up my own message, if you like, and pitch it out there to try to get some media interest. So I did. And so what basically happened was I was able to get very quickly recognize what it was journalists and producers wanted. Of course, I'd seen it from the other side. So that made it quite an interesting, unique take. And not long after that, we had someone come in on the show to talk about hypnotherapy. Now, that was a huge thing for me. And of course, this was years ago before. Now, hypnotherapy is a word that everyone understands. But back then, it was still quite unusual to talk about something like that on mainstream radio, 9 million listeners. But this person who came in, I think they'd written a book, so their publisher had managed to get them the slot. So they'd attracted a great opportunity because they'd written a book. And I have no doubt that they were a great hypnotherapist and a fantastic person to work with, but they were absolutely terrible at being interviewed. And so in this instance, we were pre-recording the interview, and it was just so painful that it was dropped. So that would have been an experience for 9 million people to hear about something amazing. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is heartbreaking, because it's not rocket science. It's just skills. Being able to find your voice, to share your message, to reach the people you want to reach. It's all about the giving. And at that point, that's what made me realize if I can help people just get some clarity on that, have some skills and know how to just share their message, then that will be a job well done. So that's why I started doing that work. And that sort of sums it up, really. It's knowing that you are the brand. It's about you, knowing what it is you have to offer and making sure that you can succinctly share that, because incredibly, so many people can't. They're great at what they do, but they can't share that. They can't give you their pitch, if you like. They can't explain to you what it is they do. And as we all know, people will do business with those they like, know, and trust. And that means they have to know a little bit about you or have some kind of connection so that they can begin to trust you.
Yeah, there's so much in that, of course, coming from a radio background where we know how to tell stories in 10 seconds, 30 seconds.
Exactly.
30 seconds, you can do an awful lot in, right? And I think people understanding that business communication is a skill that can be learned. That's something that we hold very dear here at Bravo. It's not something you're born with. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about very similar things. Let's talk about the business side of things. In the world of business communication, we talk a lot about things like executive presence. Now, you're a big advocate of something you call heart-centered communication. And I want to know, what does it mean to you to speak from the heart, but still also being strategic and clear and ensuring people notice and listen to what you have to say?
Well, I think that so much of this comes from us being aligned, if you like, with the message that we're sharing. And I think for me personally, obviously I've been working as a presenter for a ridiculous amount of years. But if you offered me a large amount of money to present a session on nuclear physics, I would find it nigh on impossible. I could read the auto cue, but it would be agony for me, absolute agony, because the honest truth is that I'm not interested. I don't know anything about it. I have no connection. There's no link to my heart with that topic whatsoever. So I would literally be about as good as AI at reading that, actually. But if you want me to talk about a topic that is close to my heart, that will flow. Yes, I've still got to do the preparation, but I will be aligned with the topic I'm sharing. And that's the energy that will come across to the audience. And I think that's the piece that we need to remember, that, you know, when we're, even if you are in an executive role and perhaps the topic you're sharing is something that might be considered really quite academic or whatever, you've still got to care about it. And if you don't, you're probably not the right person to present it. It's really that simple. Find someone who does care about it, because we've all watched a million boring presentations and watched people using PowerPoint, which just is literally pictures of their script. Well, may just as well have read the script while they look down and read the script, and the PowerPoint shows the scripts. And when people sound boring, we know there's that statistic, isn't there? You probably know the exact statistic, but I only know the broad outline, which is that if someone pops on stage and says something, to start with, you don't hear what they say, because your unconscious mind is just making sense of how they look, how they sound, making sure that you can understand the tone of their voice. You're just sorting that bit out unconsciously first, and without meaning to, of course, but we all do. And once you've got past that, hopefully very quickly, then you start to hear what's being said. But if someone's boring, you never get to hear the content, because your unconscious mind is just saying, wow, he sounds really fed up with what he's talking about. She sounds bored with herself. And you can't help it. By then, you've missed the content. It doesn't matter what the content is if it's not delivered with some passion.
Yeah, we say all the time, it's not what you say, it's how you say
exactly
it.
Exactly that.
And of course, what you say is important. Picking up on some thoughts there from what you've been talking about. Again, it's really all about connection, right? And just reading a script off a PowerPoint does not mean you're going to connect with it in any way. And if you're not connected with it, your audience certainly won't be. And something else I think that is really important in what you were saying is nonverbal cues, right? We don't even realize half the time how much we're saying without our voice, but it's so much a part of the message being decoded and picked up on.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And there's just something so powerful about just rehearsing how you will inhabit your body as when you step onto a stage, or even just speak on a microphone. It's really powerful. You know, you do need that sort of chest open, head up. You do need to be able to breathe. If you're slumped, it's really difficult to actually it's difficult for us to really properly hear your voice. And it's almost like we need to sort of send a message, allow our body to send a message to the brain, and allow the brain to send a message to the body. I'm actually in performance mode now. There's a little bit of that going on.
Oh, for sure. And again, that's why we bring in so much of our acting training into things like this. I think there's a really fine balance between how much acting work you bring into a corporate environment, because I can tell you right now, you know, a lot of our
they don't want to do that. Yeah,
they're not going to be going la la
of course
la
not.
la la la. That's not going to
exactly.
wash.
No.
But I think understanding the mind-body connection and the importance of physicality, which is what you've been talking about, is key.
Yeah.
So I want to know, here at Brava with our clients, it's all about finding their business voice. So whether through their website or a podcast or a pitch, what advice would you give for showing up authentically? And I know that's a word that's used a lot, but I want to know what you really feel about that. What tips could you share with our listeners?
I think it's about making sure that you feel aligned with the message you're sharing. So really, really finding a way of, you know, as I say, you're not going to just rock up and read a script. That's not going to cut it. So you need to really understand what message you're sharing, understand it yourself, so that you could, if necessary, ditch your script and just say it, as we were saying earlier, say it in 30 seconds. Okay, it may not be polished. It may not be the version that you want to put on camera for your clients. But if you can find a way of understanding it yourself so that you could just say it to somebody, as you said earlier, at the water cooler in 30 seconds, then you know that it's embodied within you. And then it's fine to read your script or to look at your notes, but you've got to sort of own it first. That's how you get that authentic piece, I think. And also, you know, there's no harm in doing a bit of prep. I mean, I think that there's this, there's a kind of a strange thinking that when people are going to be interviewed on the radio, or when they're going to be doing a presentation, or when they're going to be interviewed or whatever in a work setting, there's this kind of thinking sometimes that, well, I'm really experienced. I can just rock up. I'll rock up and answer whatever questions are asked of me. And so then they're particularly if it's a radio interview, people are just hoping then that there'll be the good questions that they want to answer. And then, of course, they end up getting terribly disappointed when they come out and they say to themselves, well, I wasn't asked about all the things I wanted to share. I was hoping to talk about X and Y and my objectives for the company and this. They didn't ask me about any of that. Well, of course, it's your job to come up with your own agenda. Politicians, we know, are fabulous at this, aren't
Exactly. I was just about to say.
Yeah, they're brilliant at that. Doesn't matter what you ask them, they'll tell you what they were going to tell you anyway. But, we don't need to be confrontational, and we certainly don't want to hijack the whole conversation. But we can just get good at knowing in advance, doing a bit of prep and knowing in advance what our own agenda is, particularly a couple of key messages that we're going to get across by hook or by crook. Whichever way it goes, we'll get those in. So then, if we know that and we've prepped those key messages, so we know what they are, we know how to say them in a short amount of time, whatever questions we're asked, there'll always be a way of shoehorning in the key messages that we want to get across so that we take ownership of it rather than just rocking up and waiting to see what we're asked.
Yeah. And all of that, guess what? It's a craft which you have clearly honed for many, many years. And I think often people just don't think it's a craft. They think that you can just open your mouth and it all comes out beautifully. And we both know that's not the case.
Yeah, exactly.
So in your TEDx talk and your book, Happy, Healthy, Sober, you talk about the transformation that comes with sobriety, which I imagine is a huge journey. How did quitting alcohol impact your own voice and confidence, whether that's professionally and or personally?
Yeah, I was never at rock bottom. And I do speak in the TED talk about the fact that I think in this country, we've got this kind of bizarre situation where we think there are two types of drinkers. There are those people who are at rock bottom. They need rehabilitation. They're clinically dependent. And then there's absolutely everybody else. And everybody else are just happy social drinkers. And every now and then they can't hold their beer. But that's not the reality at all. It's very much a spectrum. And the term that's now often used is grey area drinkers. It's a spectrum. It's most people who drink alcohol are somewhere on that spectrum. The majority are not at rock bottom. It's a tiny percentage, actually. Most people are somewhere on that spectrum. But many of them are drinking more than they want to. And that's the key. So I'm not up for prohibition. I've never been one to say, if you're happy drinking, great, that's fantastic. But lots and lots of people are not actually happy with the level they're drinking. And they're waking up, as I was at 3 a.m, hating themselves and just praying, oh, please let me not have a hangover so I can get through my day today. But the reality is we get caught in the alcohol trap. So it's not quite as easy as we think. Despite being professional, busy, successful people, it's not as easy to just click your fingers and not drink again. Why? Because alcohol is addictive and because our culture very much supports us continuing to drink. So if you're going to go against the tide, you've got to really make a commitment and put the work in. And so eventually, after way too many years of being off and on, I eventually quit. It's now coming up to 7.5 years. And honestly, my only regret is not doing this sooner, because the change in every single bit of your life is incredible. Not to start with, it's really hard. You think, oh my goodness, I have no idea who the hell I even am, really. I don't know who I am. It's very bizarre. You step into your sober shoes, and so much has happened to me since I quit alcohol. I've become a coach. I've trained in different therapeutic techniques. I now train sober coaches. I do media training with them as well. Just so much has changed for me. And it all comes back to that proper sense of authenticity. So what I mean by that is, in the past, now when I look back, I realize that I've written several books on holistic living. I wrote several more after my first one that have been very successful, and I've been known as queen of holistic health, whether it's organic skincare or eating the right food or whatever it is. And yet, for all of those years, I was stepping around this huge elephant in the room that was alcohol. Right. And I couldn't see it. I just couldn't see it. So I now realize that's why I found certain things so difficult. Yeah, I did find it really hard to do meditation or anything linked to proper self-esteem, because I didn't actually have any, because I wasn't really authentic. And I now know that's because I was still pouring toxic liquid in that didn't serve me. So when I was able to quit, it changed everything.
Do you think getting to that original point where you felt that you needed to do something, did any of that come from your work as a broadcaster in that world? You know, not for everybody, but a lot of that world is about going out late at night and interviewing celebrities and all that kind of thing? Or was it wrapped up in other things as well?
I mean, for years when I was in the music biz and in the early years of radio, alcohol was everywhere. You know, it really was. It was part of the culture. I was chatting to somebody the other day who I used to work with at what is now BBC London. It used to be called GLR. And Chris Evans worked there as well. A whole bunch of really well-known jocks worked there. And we would all just be in the pub on Marylebone High Street after breakfast shows. And like,
oh my God, I know.
What the hell? What the hell? It's incredible when I think back now. So alcohol was very much part of my world. But interestingly, my own drinking didn't actually ramp up then. It didn't ramp up until I had my kids. And that whole mummy wine culture thing. It's like, oh my God, I've got 4 kids. I'm exhausted. Give me some me time. You know, let me go and have a, vat of wine at the local wine bar so that I can feel grown up. It was all that nonsense. So, for me, it ramped up later. But you ask about the connection, and there was very much a connection, because after really several years of quitting for a bit, going back to it, quitting again, going back to it, because I couldn't seem to crack it. And I didn't tell anyone, because we keep it a secret, because we all think that nobody else feels the same. We think that everyone else are happy social drinkers. And clearly I wasn't someone who needed to go to the doctor. We know that. But I needed some help. I just didn't know what or how. And then it was literally because we interviewed Claire Pooley, who'd written a book called The Sober Diaries. And I was given that book by the producer just before Christmas. And he said, oh, if you can have a read of this over the Christmas period, because we're interviewing the author in January. And as you know, if you've worked in radio, that's unheard of. You get a book the night before if you're lucky. If you're lucky, usually you flick through before the interview, right? So to have 2 weeks to read a book, and I looked at the title and I thought, wow, that's it. I knew in that second that was it. And I read that book. It was totally relatable. Somebody else, just like me, busy mum, working, etc., caught in the alcohol trap, got through it. And that literally changed my life. So I figured, well, I'll quit. So I quit on the day after Christmas. Wasn't going to miss Christmas, clearly. Quit the day after. And I never looked back. I thought, well, I'll do Dry January just in honour of Claire, who's coming into the studio. But thank God I was able to catch sight of a better life and never went back.
Congratulations on 7 years sober. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about all those things which I resonate with deeply, being a mum, working in those environments where sometimes you would go to the pub after a breakfast show, all of that. But what's really fascinating is it took a complete stripping back of yourself in order to find that authentic voice, and that is something that requires an awful lot of strength. If there's anyone listening to this, and I know that there will be, who might just be at that point where they're thinking they've got to do something, what would your advice be right now to find their authentic voice?
Are you talking about in terms of alcohol or just generally?
Oh,
in terms of alcohol?
Both.
Yeah. In terms of alcohol, what I recommend is the question to ask yourself is, could my life be better physically and emotionally without alcohol? So don't bother with am I drinking too much? Am I an alcoholic? Don't bother with any of that. It's if you're functioning normally, then you just simply ask, could my life be better physically and emotionally without alcohol? And if a little voice shouts, hell yes, then there's your opportunity. Commit to minimum of 30 days without alcohol, but don't use the phrase give up ever, because there's nothing to give up. So train your unconscious mind to use a different phrase. I usually say ditching the booze. And then focus only on what you're gaining. So that's where the connection comes in and the inspiration. So I have a podcast, Alcohol Free Life, which has amazing guests and amazing inspiration. I run the Sober Club, which is an amazing connection group. And of course, I'm a coach as well. But whichever way you do it, there are a million different ways to do it. But get connected and inspired, because that's what keeps you going. It's that constantly playing that tape forward thing, because the first few weeks are hard. Yeah, they are, because you're doing something different. You're literally rewiring neural pathways. And you've potentially had years where whatever happens to you, oh my God, I'm exhausted, I'll reach for a drink. Oh, I've had a really tricky phone call, I'll reach for a drink. We have to find new ways of getting a dopamine hit. new ways of going through the urge.
I feel like you're talking directly to me, so I should certainly be clicking on all the links. And I think so many of us are going to be resonating with exactly what you're saying, and we will make sure we put all the links up in the show notes for you. I want to go on to speaking about people using their voice in public. What's one mistake you often see people make when they start using their voice in public, and how can they shift it? Is there something simple you could talk us through?
Yeah, I mean, I think people often, it comes back to this thing of people trying to be someone else or trying to be something they're not. So they try to change their voice, or they think to themselves, oh, for this audience, I must, wear clothes I never normally wear, and I must speak a certain way. And it's actually not true. What we want is the authentic you. So yes, be the best version of you. I'm not saying, rock up in your gardening clothes necessarily, but be who you are, know who you are, number one. So recognize you're the brand, whether you have a brand or not. You're still a brand. How you present yourself is really important. And then own who you are. And then I would just say, as I said before, actually do your prep. So one thing I sometimes share is that, if you were to go into the rehearsal room of any theatre where they're auditioning actors, and let's say you've got 15 actors waiting for a call, waiting to be auditioned, none of those actors will be sitting in silence. If there's space of any kind, they'll be pacing around, saying their words out loud. And there's a real power in that muscle memory. There really is, actually getting your mouth around the world.
Oh, yes.
Is really important, because if you only read your script, then the first time you say it out loud, you're going to stumble and trip and annoy yourself. So actually, if you've done that muscle memory piece and just prepped it out loud, rehearse it, record it on your phone, listen back. That's a killer at first. When you first hear your own voice, oh God, I had to listen behind a pillow. The first radio show I did, I literally had to get a cushion. It was painful. But you get used to it. So record yourself, listen to it back, and just make sure you're not you don't have to do much, but just make sure that you're not going so fast that people can't catch what you're saying, and you get used to it. And just the muscle memory helps you feel so much more confident.
Yeah. And we talk a lot here about you're never trying to mimic someone else. The minute you try and mimic someone, you're not being your authentic self. And I think working with a coach is really helpful to enable you to strip away everything and just work out, who am I as a creative person now, and who am I moving forward? So there's so much in that. And the need to be authentic as well reminds me of that quote from Oscar Wilde, be yourself, everyone else is taken.
It's taken,
right?
Yeah, totally.
The master of all quotes. So we're coming up to the end of our chat now. I could chat to you about so many other things, but sadly we are short of time. Finally, what excites you most about the voices that are emerging now, whether that's in broadcasting, coaching, or creative spaces? Is there anyone where you think they're really great at what they do?
Well, obviously, I'd have to give a shout out to some of the sober coaches I've trained, because I've been doing it for about 3 years now. And it's very much holistic sober coaching. And some of the guys I've trained have just gone on to do such amazing things. They're going into the workplace and they're offering webinars in the workplace for companies who want to recognize the impact that alcohol is having on their staff. They're not rocking up on a Monday or whatever. So being able to do that with from a heart-centered place is really phenomenal. So I'd like to give a shout out to them. But also an initiative that has literally just come about is a colleague of mine is Lynn Franks. I don't know if you know Lynn. She does amazing stuff.
And she's her for this podcast.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Be on it too.
Well, you'll get to hear all about it then. But Lynn's new project, What Women Want, which she's literally just done a little launch at the House of Commons
just last week.
Yeah, is really exciting. And I think that's going to bring forward some great conversation and some fantastic, authentic voices.
Oh, you know what? We're going to be supporting that initiative. It's really fascinating. So again, we'll share all the links. But just one thing remains for me to say. Janey Lee Grace, thank you so much for your time. I have really enjoyed finding out more about you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You've been listening to High Notes, a podcast on the art and business of voice. Thanks for joining us on this episode of High Notes. Check out the episode description below for more information. And to find out more about our work at Bravo and get info and tips, subscribe to our newsletter. The link is also below. Join us next time for more insights into the world of voice.